So let's talk about pardons. And I'm talking specifically the ones about which convicted felon Donald Trump clearly has no idea to whom he is giving. I mean, Trump is handing out pardons like it's candy, or maybe more accurately, like they're drugs. He's like a pardon peddler, like your typical drug dealer who's sitting there trying to peddle his wares. In this instance, and according to reporting from the Washington Post, I'm going to read it for you right now. It's kind of wild. Public disclosures are showing lobbyists have spent more than $2.1 million this year on firms that are advocating for pardons, clemency, and other forms of executive relief, more than double the total that was spent in 2024. Individuals seeking pardons have paid up to $1 million to hire people close to the president to plead their case. Now, for somebody who seems hell-bent on allegedly trying to make sure that he's cleaning up the drug problem in not only in the United States but globally, we have Donald Trump pardoning the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez. And we also have him pardoning, the guy that was the founder of the Silk Road, Ross Ulbright, who was convicted of creating the largest online black market for illegal drugs and other illicit goods, including facilitating traffickers of all sorts of bad stuff. I want to specifically focus, though, on Henry Cuellar, the Democratic congressman from Texas. And no, I'm not going to get into the merits of the prosecution of Henry Cuellar, although we will talk about what the facts are that are alleged to have happened with Cuellar. I want to talk about the fact that Donald Trump gave Cuellar and his wife a full and complete pardon. And then once Cuellar announced that he was not going to run as a Republican, as if to, quote, pay back Donald Trump for the pardon, Trump decided that Cuellar was a bad person because Cuellar will run as a Democrat again. Now, I would love to have been a fly on the wall for the conversations that took place vis-a-vis this Cuellar pardon, but I really want to talk about the hypocrisy of it and the fact that it is clearly a pay-to-play scheme in the Trump White House. If you have the money, if you're the Binance guy, CZ, whatever, you're able to get your ass pardoned by this president. We've had conversations before about the role of pardons. And look, I can't begrudge the fact that this is exclusively a privilege and a right, a power of the president to exercise, but it really should be done with some measure of wisdom, maturity, decency. I mean, the concept is clemency, but at this point, it's whoever is the highest bidder can actually get access to be able to get these pardons. At least that's the message that's being sent. So let's talk about Cuellar because it's a little bit fakakta in my humble opinion. All right. So here we go. Donald Trump blasted Congressman Henry Cuellar on Truth Social. Why? Because Trump gave Cuellar and his wife a full and complete pardon, as we just talked about. Now, I don't want to, read the entire Truth Social post because not only is it unintelligible, but it's too damn long and it's not worth wasting your collective time. But I'm going to read some of the highlights of it so you understand the context. According to Donald Trump, the Democrats were, quote, vicious and mercilessly went after Henry with everything they had. And according to Trump, the reason why this was some vindictive prosecution by Biden, because allegedly Cuellar supports border security. Quote, it was all very unfair what they were doing to him and his family, so much so that his daughters wrote me a beautiful letter about their parents. After reading it, I decided in the interest of justice and based on the daughters' loving request that I would give Henry and Imelda a full and complete pardon. I signed the papers and said to people in the Oval Office that I just did a very good, perhaps life-saving thing. God was very happy with me that day. No idea why Donald Trump would think that God would ever be happy with any decision that Donald Trump makes. Then, this is where Trump gets pissy and nasty and petty. Only a short time after signing the pardon, Congressman Henry Cuellar announced that he will be running for Congress again in the great state of Texas as a Democrat, continued to work with the same radical left scum that just weeks before wanted him and his wife to spend the rest of their lives in prison. Such a lack of loyalty, something that Texas voters and Henry's daughters, disgusting for Trump to implicate or bring in Cuellar's daughters, something that the Texas voters and Henry's daughters will not like. Oh, well, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy. I don't think anybody confuses Trump for being a nice guy, but here's the crazy shit. The investigation may have begun under the Biden administration, but it was the Trump administration's DOJ led by Pamela Joe, law lackey extraordinaire, that decided to actually bring the charges against Cuellar and his wife, Imelda. So it was actually Trump's own DOJ that brought the charges. The investigation was begun under Biden, but the charging decision was made by Trump's own DOJ. So if there's anybody to blame for Cuellar's indictment, and again, no commentary on whether or not it's valid or not, but if there's anybody to blame, it's Trump's own DOJ. So Trump is now saying that his own DOJ is vindictive and selectively prosecuting people based upon their political beliefs and their policy beliefs. I mean, I just read it to you. It was Trump's own words. But let's talk about for a second, let's talk about the case against Cuellar and his wife, because I do think this is really important for you to understand the context. So, Henry Cuellar and his wife Imelda were initially indicted for 14 federal counts, and just a couple of months ago, the DOJ moved the court to dismiss 2 of the 14 counts against Cuellar and his wife. It's a federal bribery and conspiracy indictment, and they were supposed to go to trial actually in September of this year, but it just got rescheduled for next year. Well, now it'll never happen because they got pardoned, but it was supposed to happen next year in April of 2026. Cuellar, age 69, and his wife Imelda were charged with accepting thousands of dollars in exchange for the congressman basically putting his finger on the scale to help advance an Azerbaijan-controlled energy company and a bank in Mexico. The allegations are that Cuellar agreed in exchange for $600,000 that he would deliver pro-Azerbaijan speeches on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, and the payments initially went through a Texas-based shell company owned by Cuellar's wife Imelda and 2 of Cuellar's children, and this is according to the allegations in the indictment against the Cuellars. Now, the Cuellars at the time were still facing 12 charges, so this is also a little bit of a primer on you can be pardoned before you are actually convicted of a crime. So, just because you've been indicted, or you could also be facing charges, you could actually be pardoned, right? And so in this instance, the Cuellars had yet to be convicted, but they were indicted and facing 12 charges since, and they were given a full and complete pardon. The charges included conspiracy, bribery, and money laundering. Again, very serious charges that were being faced by the Cuellars. So the trial was expected to last 5 weeks. Cuellar served in Congress for more than 20 years. And let's talk about his district, because I want to talk about the redistricting efforts that were just done by the Texas Republicans that the Supreme Court just said, unfortunately, that the midterms in 2026, that bullshit redistricting illegal map, those maps could be used in 2026. Cuellar's district goes from San Antonio to the U.S.-Mexico border in South Texas. Now, footnote, Cuellar's own lawyers tried to move his trial from Houston to Laredo, which is the hometown of the Cuellars, and that request was denied by the federal judge. Since the Cuellars got indicted back in April of 2024, 3 people pleaded guilty in connection with the case. Colin Strother, one of Cuellar's top former aides, Florencio Rendon, a Texas political and business consultant, and Irada Akondova, who was director of a Texas affiliate of an Azerbaijan energy company. So 3 people have pleaded guilty since the Cuellars were indicted, but according to Donald Trump, this was just a setup. And the Cuellars, by the way, say this too. They say that they were set up and entrapped. And that is the reason why this all happened, to the tune of $600,000 bribes from an Azerbaijani oil company and a Mexican bank. Okay, so those are the charges. Now, look, again, it makes you scratch your head a little bit. So the Cuellars, because according to the Donald Trump's Truth Social post, I never spoke to the congressman, his wife, or his daughters. So let me get this straight. Trump gives a full and complete pardon to 2 people that he never spoke to. Now, we all know that Trump lies all the time. So in this instance, I'd really like to know, there was literally no communication between the Cuellars and Trump? Okay. Or is Trump trying to be a technical asshole? Maybe it was Cuellar's lawyers or whatever. But either way, right? Trump has zero knowledge about these people. He has no idea what they have done. He just on a whim is granting pardons, again, giving it out like candy, right? You got Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who was convicted and sentenced to 45 years for facilitating the importation of 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. But let's give him a total pardon. Footnote, while we're blowing up people in the Caribbean Sea, allegedly narco traffickers from Venezuela, we're also going to give all these other pardons. How about Rob Blagojevich from Chicago? Remember him? He also got a pardon. George Santos, he got a commutation. I mean, I'm assuming Donald Trump actually knew who these people were, right? But in this instance, you, as in Donald Trump, you gambled and you lost, whether it was calculated and planned or this was totally off the cuff because you woke up one day and in your brain-addled, dementia-laden state, you decided that you were going to give a pardon to somebody whose daughters asked for the pardon, allegedly. Cuellar himself didn't ask for it for him and his wife, whatever. Cuellar and his wife probably sent the daughters along, but either way. Trump just woke up one day and said, fuck it, I'm just going to give a pardon to the Cuellars, a full and complete pardon, right? Okay. But in exchange, Cuellar's going to have to what? Pledge his loyalty and run as a Republican in Texas. The funny thing is this. You want to know something? Cuellar's district was impacted, but slightly by the Republicans redistricting maps, right? And so what's kind of funny is Cuellar thinks that he's going to win his district again. And the Republicans probably don't have any type of kind of, realistic view that they're going to be able to pick up Cuellar's district. A couple of thoughts on that. I don't know about you, but if you're in Cuellar's district and this guy's running as a Democrat again, it's not like I'm telling you to vote for Republican, but I got to tell you this. I don't even think that this situation merits one of those clean hands kind of assessments, right? But number two, getting back to Trump, what a dumbass you are. But what does it tell you? What does it tell you? It is 100% a pay-to-play scheme, number one. And number two, it tells you that Trump thinks purely in transactional ways. He doesn't think about the greater good of America. He doesn't think about messages that are being sent about our judicial system and our justice system and the prosecution of people that are accepting bribes, allegedly. It just goes to show that this asshole is just a transactional bastard. And all he thinks is if I can pick up a win, it's how I'm going to do it. Which just also goes to show that anything and everything that is coming out of this administration has to be viewed with skepticism and with the reality that it is a total grift operation. If it benefits Trump in some maybe collateral ways, benefits his family, it's fine. But if it benefits him 100%, then it's all good, right? But this one blew up in his face. And again, not quite sure how I feel about it being Cuellar with these indictments. But look, I mean, oh well, I guess good for Henry Cuellar then, right? You get a full and complete pardon for you and your wife, even though 3 people implicated in this bribery scheme have already pleaded guilty, right? But Cuellar gets his full and complete pardon, and he still thinks he's running as a Democrat. Again, I don't even know how that works either. Frankly, I think that somebody should run against Cuellar at this point because Cuellar's like, I'm all about border security and I'm a conservative Democrat. I don't know what the fuck a conservative Democrat is these days. But that being said, anybody who is supporting an immigration scheme that's coming out of this administration deserves to be primaried and to not win. Alrighty. Anyway, that is what we talked about today. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. If you want to learn more, let me know. But this is just, really, I just have to shrug my shoulders on this one. This pardon, just boondoggle that is happening with Donald Trump right now completely undermines our judiciary, our whole prosecution judicial system, and it undermines Congress, right? This is not the place for somebody who allegedly took $600,000 in bribes to be able to deliver pro speeches for special interests, right? On the floor of the United States House of Representatives. It just all smacks of being dirty. Again, very Trumpy, but just disturbing all the way around. So I know that we've been covering in the last maybe 24 plus hours a lot of the news about the Jack Smith videotaped deposition. The video has since been released. The transcript has since been released. The transcript is 255 pages. The video is about 8 hours long. I have gone through the transcript at least once. And I will tell you this, there is just some incredibly powerful testimony that was provided by former special counsel Jack Smith that is worth emphasizing about Donald Trump's guilt, criminal culpability, complicity, co-conspirator role in not only the classified documents, violation of the Espionage Act, federal criminal prosecution in Florida, but also the election interference case that was run by special counsel Jack Smith out of Washington, D.C. Those criminal cases, as you know, came to a screeching halt courtesy of the uber conservative 6 on the United States Supreme Court with their ruling concerning the liability of a president, and also this kind of rule that you don't prosecute a sitting president of the United States. So it's a little twofold, right? It's the Supreme Court of the United States. It's also the fact that Donald Trump made it back into the Oval Office in November of 2024. But I actually want to focus on a different part of the Jack Smith deposition because it's the thing that the Republicans are trying to use as a red herring right now to distract the American people as to the incredibly powerful evidence that existed and currently exists, frankly, against Donald Trump that would have resulted in his guilty verdict by a jury of his peers should these cases have gone to trial. And the component of Jack Smith's deposition that I want to focus on deals with the toll records, the cell phone records that were subpoenaed and obtained when it relates to members of Congress. And the Republicans in Congress, senators and congressmen, they've kind of lost their shit about this, and they're trying to make it seem like this was some huge politically motivated, targeted thing that was done by Jack Smith at the behest of Merrick Garland, Joe Biden, the Democrats. And I'm here to tell you, as Jack Smith swore under oath and provided in his deposition testimony, there's no there there. And you may ask yourself, Katie, why are you even bothering to spend any time on this if there's no there there? It's because I want you to be empowered with the knowledge and the evidence and the information so that when your MAGA-loving friends, family members, and others are trying to sit there and tell you that there was some huge invasion of privacy that occurred by Jack Smith, you're prepared to tell them that is 100% a crock of shit. Now, I'm going to make some citations to the deposition transcript itself because I think it's really important. But let's just start generally with kind of some basics here, right? Jack Smith was deposed December 17th, 2025. In a letter dated October 23rd, 2025 through his lawyers, Smith offered to testify publicly. That was shut down by the Judiciary Committee, the chair being Jim Jordan. No big surprise. And now that we've seen not only Smith testify via the video that we've watched, but now we've read his testimony, now we know why Republicans would have been terrified to have that happen in real time. There is something to be said about it, how still having a value that we're able to see it, but it clearly would have been better if it had been done publicly in real time. Anyway, there's a few things here that I want to look to in the deposition transcript that I think are worthwhile spending time talking about. But let's just also kind of high level talk about the much ado about nothing that the Republican lawmakers have created. Because remember, this is also the crux of a criminal referral to the Department of Justice, a criminal investigation, threats to be able to criminally investigate and prosecute Jack Smith for not only his role in his prosecution of convicted felon Donald Trump, but also concerns about what the hell went on here with these phone toll records. Okay. So back in September, on September 27th of 2023, there's an FBI document, and I'm going to pull it up right now on your screen so you can look at it. And this FBI document is unclassified, and it basically says, and it references Arctic Frost, which was the investigation into election interference, right? And it says that there is an FBI special agent whose name has been redacted, and that person conducted, quote, preliminary toll analysis on limited tolls records associated with the following United States senators, and it lists them: Mike Kelly, Lindsey Graham, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Dan Sullivan, Tommy Tuberville, Ron Johnson, Cynthia Loomis, and Marsha Blackburn. Now, that's it, and that's all that we have. And Chuck Grassley referenced that letter. And basically, we know that back in 2023, investigators obtained the toll records for these particular lawmakers, and those toll records were scrutinized and analyzed. But here is the crux of the nothing burger. Okay? And I want to have the dramatic pregnant pause here. The toll records only showed date and time of phone calls, did not show content of those communications. These were not text messages that were received and analyzed by the FBI. These were not the wiretap listening and recording to the audio of these conversations in these calls. This was simply date and time of phone calls. Now, Jack Smith, in his investigation into Donald Trump's election interference, right? In that case, Jack Smith and his team looked into the phone calls that were made by and between lawmakers and Trump on the evening of January 6, 2021. Why? Because part of Jack Smith's theory of the case is that Donald Trump was, at the 11th hour, as we know, during the throes of the January 6th insurrection, Trump was reaching out to congressional Republicans in a last-ditch effort to be able to convince them to hold the illegal line, the unconstitutional line, and not allow the certification of the election results to happen. And so if you look at the indictment against felon Trump that was brought in 2023 concerning the election interference case, it alleged that there were multiple attempts made by Donald Trump and all of his alleged co-conspirators to reach out to Republican senators and congresspeople to be able to convince them to not go through with the certification process. And those communications, those outreach were done via what? Via phone. So of course, when you're building a case, part of your investigative kind of profiles include looking into verification and who was talking to whom when and how, not necessarily what was being discussed. And that is a really important nuance. And that is why all of this insanity from the Republicans and why you see them spending so much time in Smith's deposition, like all of the real estate by the Republicans was either you were politically motivated, weren't you, Jack Smith? He's like, nope. You did this just because you wanted to get to Donald Trump because somebody told you to do it. Nope. You illegally looked into all of these Congress people's phones. And he's like, nope, just got date and time of calls. Now, again, the indictment against Trump, the 2023 indictment argued, or it alleged that Trump, quote, attempted to exploit the violence and chaos at the Capitol by calling lawmakers to convince them, based on knowingly false claims of election fraud, to delay the certification. And remember, special counsel Jack Smith had a 2-volume final report, as all special counsel do. They create these final reports. Other special counsel reports, like, those looking into Joe Biden and Robert Mueller's special counsel report, right? Those are all made public. But, Judge Cannon down in Florida, she's putting her thumb on the scales of justice to benefit Donald Trump, and she's refusing to disclose volume 2 of Jack Smith's report. But volume 1 has been publicly released. And you'll recall that report argued, basically, that Trump would have been convicted if not for him winning the November 2024 presidential election. But it also specifically identified phone calls made by Trump and members of his inner circle and his co-conspirators to be able to convince Republican lawmakers not to certify the results. Okay, so I kind of wanted to take a mini detour for a second and go to a specific citation here in the transcripts because I thought it was important. It's page 85 of the deposition transcript, and I just thought this was powerful. So forgive me for taking a little bit of a detour, but this is what he says. He being Jack Smith. And this is in response to Jared Moskowitz asking him about retribution. And Jack Smith says, page 85, starting at line 13, I have no doubt that the president wants to seek retribution against me. I have no doubt that's the intent. He goes on line 20, same page. So I am eyes wide open that this president will seek retribution against me if he can. I know that. I don't frankly connect that with this hearing, as in the deposition he was giving back on December 17th. I don't have any connection. I came here. I was asked to come here. Fast forward to page 86, line 4. I will say I agree that this department, as in the DOJ, led by Pamela Joe, law lackey extraordinaire, I will say I agree that this department wants to seek retribution against anybody who worked on cases against President Trump. And folks, I really wanted to just say that out loud. I mean, I know it's obvious to those of us that are actually paying attention to what's going on, but the courage it takes for somebody like Jack Smith to want to testify publicly and to come forward and give this testimony knowing that Donald Trump has announced that he wants to have a criminal investigation. He wants to see Jack Smith arrested. In fact, look at this headline, right? Trump saying that he wants prosecutions of Jack Smith. The only thing Jack Smith did is what, folks? He just, I don't know. He secured indictments and he prosecuted Donald Trump because the facts and the evidence, as Smith has testified, supported those indictments in those cases. Now, when it comes to the toll records, again, I want to go back to the depo testimony because I think it's very important. Starting on page 93, I want to focus stuff right here, okay? So, and again, this is a little bit in the weeds, but it's important because the Republicans tried to make a lot of hay out of this toll record thing. And I want you to understand why there is literally nothing there. So the question to Jack Smith is the following about subpoenaing then Speaker Kevin McCarthy's toll records after he became House Speaker, because the records sought were from November of 2020 through January 8th of 2021. So the question to Jack Smith was, what were you looking for with McCarthy's records? Like, what did you do with the information you obtained? And Smith answered the following way. So the relevance of those records, there would be several examples, but his contacts with either co-conspirators, the president, or conduits of information to the president was relevant to our investigation. An example I could give you is on January 6th. We had information from Mark Meadows, who was present for a call where Congressman McCarthy was asking for help. McCarthy was asking the president to come to his aid while the Capitol was being seized. Getting the exact toll records for when that happened, as in the call, when that call happened, was relevant for our investigation, both to question other witnesses about it so we had an accurate timeline, and also to corroborate that the call happened at approximately the time witnesses said it happened. Question, but it's pretty significant to subpoena the Speaker of the House's toll records, right? Answer from Jack Smith. We followed department policy. We followed all legal requirements in getting those records. Question, I mean, to get the information you're looking for, nobody disputed the Speaker and the President were having communications on January 6th. So one way you could have gotten that information is you could have asked the Speaker's lawyer to look at his phone records and give you the information you needed, right? And here comes the incredible 30-plus year experience as a federal prosecutor, Jack Smith's answer. And I, as a fellow former prosecutor and as a trial lawyer, appreciate this response. This is on page 94, line 16. Well, you say now that nobody is disputing, but my experience in criminal investigations is that people often at trial dispute things that you never thought were going to be in dispute during the investigation. And so when I conduct a criminal investigation, I don't assume there will be no disputes. Let's stop for a second there. I mean, right? I mean, would you ever
go half-assed into a trial? The answer is no. You would never go half-assed into a trial. You over-prepare, folks, and I would expect nothing less from somebody who is of the caliber and the integrity and the preparation and the skill of Jack Smith. Smith goes on at line 20. Having a record that is a hard record about a time. And the timeline of that afternoon was particularly important because the violence had started. The president refused to stop it. He endangered the life of his vice president, and then he's getting calls. And not calls from Democrats, not calls from people he doesn't know, calls from people he trusts, calls from people he relies on. And still, Trump refuses to come to the aid of the people at the Capitol. That is very important evidence for criminal intent in our case. Moving forward to page 95, this is it, folks. This is the case. All of the Republicans making this big hay about these toll records, spending the bulk of time that they could spend with Jack Smith, not asking Jack Smith about the guilt of Donald Trump, his culpability, his complicity, his fingerprints, his DNA, over all of the stuff that happened on January 6th, all of the stuff leading up to the election and after the election and everything, and the classified documents, right? Not asking about why there were classified documents in the shitter at Mar-a-Lago, but they want to question the legality of the obtaining of these toll records. And Jack Smith on page 95, line 7 says this: "We got these records in a manner that was consistent with the law and consistent with department policy. There was nothing improper about how we got these records." I mean, folks, you cannot make up shit and make it stick against Jack Smith when there is nothing that man did wrong. Nothing that he did wrong. Later on page 95, they ask him, as in they asked Jack Smith, well, what about with Representative Perry? You could have contacted his lawyer. You could have said, this is what we're looking for. Can you help achieve this without seizing his phone? Because there is only one member of Congress that got their phone seized, and that was Representative Perry. Line 18, this is what Jack Smith does in his answer. He says, well, with Congressman Perry, I should point out that the seizure of his phone happened several months before I was ever special counsel. I wasn't involved in that process. Line 23, I'm not going to speculate on investigative steps that occurred before I became special counsel. Page 96, there has to be a reasonable basis to believe that there's going to be materially relevant evidence. And that is why Jack Smith got those toll records. Okay? So let's just keep on moving forward a little bit together, okay? Line 7, this is what Jack Smith tells in an answer about, again, ad nauseum, the toll records being obtained. Well, I can tell you that, for example, there was contact on, for example, January 6th. But again, another example for you is Mark Meadows. When we interviewed him, he referenced the fact that afternoon, Chairman Jordan, and you guys know this is great, right? Because Jim Jordan is sitting there during this deposition of Jack Smith. And every once in a while in the deposition transcript, you can see Jim Jordan interjecting and trying to act like he's like some big man on campus, even though his sorry ass looks like he's just some juvenile child trying to sit there and pick a fight. Right? So Jack Smith says the afternoon of January 6th, Chairman Jim Jordan was in contact with the White House. And like Congressman McCarthy's contact with the White House, it was relevant because, again, Mark Meadows stated that these were supporters. These were credible people that the president relied on. And what I recall was Meadows stating that I've never seen Jim Jordan scared of anything. And the fact that we were in this different situation now where people were scared really made it clear that what was going on at the Capitol could not be mistaken for anything other than what it was. And it goes back to that sort of information from someone who is a credible source to the president, proving that actually happened and that there's actually a record of that call and exactly when it happened and what actions happened after that or didn't happen after that, extremely probative to our case. And then on page 98, Jack Smith says, I don't have any reason to believe that the subpoena was secured for any improper purpose or that it was secured in contravention of Department of Justice regulations or the law at that time. Powerful, right, people? Now, I just want to kind of cite a little bit more to you. And this, I think, is a great way for us to kind of maybe wrap up our conversation about this. This is on page 102, starting at line 18. And Jack Smith is being questioned. To the extent members of Congress and senators are up in arms that this happened to them and they're seeking accountability, who should be held accountable for answering these questions? And Jack Smith answers, well, I think who should be accountable for this is Donald Trump. These records are people. In the case of the senators, Donald Trump directed his co-conspirators to call these people to further delay the proceedings. He, as in Donald Trump, chose to do that. If Donald Trump had chosen to call a number of Democratic senators, we would have gotten toll records for Democratic senators. So responsibility for why these records, why we collected them, that lies with Donald Trump. Certainly, my office did everything consistent with the law and department regulations at the time. To the extent you think something needs to be changed, that change happened, but that was not required at the time that we issued these subpoenas. Folks, so Jack Smith underscoring the following realities. He legally obtained the toll records of Republican members of Congress. He did not obtain the audio tape conversations. He didn't obtain the text messages. It was date and times of calls. He did it as a part of an investigation that was built to bring a criminal prosecution that was successfully obtained from a grand jury. And it was and would have been a successful prosecution to verdict of convicted felon Donald Trump. And as we hear Jack Smith say in his deposition testimony that you just read to you, if members of Congress, if Republican senators and congressmen have an issue with their cell records, the toll records, the date and time of those calls being obtained by Jack Smith, they should take it up with Donald Trump, because Donald Trump himself ordered his co-conspirators and Donald Trump himself made phone calls to delay, to make sure that those election results were not certified on January 6th. Why? To further the conspiracy to achieve the end goal of him staying in office. End of story. Thank you very much for your time today. We don't even need to get it any further. Folks, with what I've given to you, you should be able to shut down any bullshit that is raised by MAGA lovers telling you that there was something incredibly criminal or violative and some type of wrongdoing that was, occurring on the watch of special counsel Jack Smith. It's bullshit. It's a false narrative, and it doesn't fucking fly. Be mad, be outraged, fake people. It is 2026. I'm going to demand accountability every damn day until we have justice achieved. If you haven't liked and subscribed, we're paying attention to the Texas gerrymandering. We're paying attention to the tariffs. We're paying attention to the Epstein files and the latest in the Ghislaine Maxwell debacle. But we're also paying attention here at the Katie Phang News Channel to Alligator Alcatraz and the latest developments there. Not only the legal developments, but just the human developments there. Or maybe it's the lack of humanity. Partially because Alligator Alcatraz is being held up and touted by the Trump administration and Kristi Noem at the Department of Homeland Security as kind of the gold standard to be able to emulate and to replicate in other places like Arizona, Nebraska, Louisiana. We know that Fort Bliss in Texas is already being used to detain immigrants. We also know that Governor Greg Abbott has pledged to build the largest immigrant detention facility in the Trump administration. It is a race to the bottom for these people. They have no souls. They are soulless ghouls. But even just yesterday, Kristi Noem announcing the, quote, Speedway Slammer in Indiana, the capabilities of holding 1,000 detainees at a maximum security prison. I want you to stop for a second and think about this. Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted child sex predator, convicted child sex trafficker, convicted child sex abuser. She's not even at a maximum security prison. In fact, she got special dispensation to go to a minimum security camp where you could just walk off. You can go on work release. But more than 70% of the immigrants that are currently in custody, in detention, courtesy of the Trump administration, they have no criminal history. But we're going to put them at a maximum security prison in Indiana because Kristi Noem wants to be able to call it in a cutesy way, in a kitschy way, quote, the Speedway Slammer. It's disgusting, the dehumanization of people. We know that there's an Alligator Alcatraz hunger strike right now because of the inhumane conditions at that facility. It's a concentration camp, people. It meets all the definitions of a concentration camp. And we have people that are being shipped out in ambulances because of the hunger strike and because of the conditions there. And just yesterday, the local NBC affiliate, NBC6 here in South Florida,
It had a former corrections officer who was working at Alligator Alcatraz. Her name is Lindsay. I want you to take a listen right now to the way that she describes the conditions at Alligator Alcatraz. She witnessed them firsthand. She experienced them firsthand. She lived them firsthand. But I want you to listen very carefully to the way that she describes the conditions for the detainees that are at Alligator Alcatraz. Take a listen.
While Lindsay knew she was going to be living in a shared trailer, she says the conditions were rough for everyone there.
We had to use the porta-johns. We didn't have hot water half the time. Our bathrooms were backed up.
Shut it down! Shut it down! NBC6 has reported similar accounts from advocates, detainees, and their families.
It looked like an oversized dog kennel.
She says each tent had 8 large cages.
Each pod holds 35 to 38 inmates. They have bunk beds in them.
Do the math, and that means each tent holds close to 300 detainees.
They have no sunlight. There's no clock in there. They don't even know what time of the day it is. They shower every other day or every 4 days. The bathrooms are backed up because you got so many people using them.
On rainy days, she says, the water pours into the tents. She described the conditions as miserable. Not to forget the constant battle with mosquitoes.
Not everybody there is a criminal.
NBC6 News has asked the state for a list of detainees at Alligator Alcatraz, but has not received it. Last month, a Human Rights Watch report found nearly 72% of people detained had no criminal history.
These people are still human. You pulled them from their livelihood. They're scared. They don't speak our language.
Detainees being held in large dog kennels, 300 detainees per tent, no sunlight, backed up toilets, urine and feces on the floor, flooding from the rain, which is, by the way, normal. Summer rain, summer storms in South Florida, they're like tsunamis. They are like torrential downpours, and that's normal. And there's that kind of flooding. I mean, I could go on and on, but you heard from Lindsay. You heard how she described what's happening at Alligator Alcatraz. So what's being done? As I sit here today, there is a continued court hearing that is happening in federal court in Miami in the Southern District of Florida. It is one of 2 lawsuits that have been brought concerning Alligator Alcatraz. The one that is going on right now is before a federal judge by the name of Kathleen Williams. She's the former federal public defender in the Southern District of Florida. If you recognize her name, I covered her and her courage and her defense of the rule of law when I was talking about how she held in contempt the current Florida Attorney General, James Utmeyer, for his failure to abide by a court order concerning an immigration law in the state of Florida that was deemed to be unconstitutional. So Judge Williams right now is conducting a second day of a hearing. And which lawsuit is it? It's the one that I've also covered. It is the one that is being brought by the environmental organizations. And specifically, it is being brought by the Friends of the Everglades and the Center for Biological Diversity. That lawsuit was filed on June 27th. If you also follow me on Substack, I did a Substack live with the lawyer, one of the lawyers that represents the Friends of the Everglades. That lawsuit is the fact that prior to the construction of Alligator Alcatraz, the state of Florida failed to obtain, as well as the federal government, frankly, failed to obtain the requisite pass to be able to do so because there's existing federal environmental laws that require you to determine the impact on the environment before you are going to build something like Alligator Alcatraz. Because it's in the middle of the Big Cypress National Preserve. It's in the middle of the Everglades. And there's all sorts of ecological harm, biological diversity harm that could happen. And so that's the reason why you need to make sure that you do the necessary studies, none of which were done. It was just erected kind of, in the dead of night. Now, according to the state of Florida, they're saying that because this concentration camp is a state-run facility, the federal regulations regarding the environment do not apply. But here's where it gets very kind of wonky. And just like in the other lawsuit that I'm going to talk about in a second, which was brought by the ACLU on behalf of the detainees because they can't get contact with their lawyers, the Judge Williams, has been saying, okay, this is a state facility, but it has federal immigration detainees. You'll remember, we've talked about this. When you have federal immigration law, that trumps anything dealing with state stuff when it deals with these immigrants. And so here's the confusion. You have a state-run facility run by the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And remember, it's $450 million in Florida state funds that are being used to construct and implement and run this concentration camp. But it's holding federal immigration detainees. And every time a judge like Judge Williams is asking, well, show me the agreement. What's this agreement binding between the state of Florida and the Trump administration as the federal government that dictates who does what, who runs what, whose authority is being applied to be able to do this facility? And it's crickets. There's no production of documents. There's no explanation that's being given. And so these environmental groups that are suing are saying, Judge, we need this clarity. We need to know what the hell is going on here, because according to the defendants, they're saying, oh, no, we don't have to deal with federal laws dealing with the environment because we're not a federal run facility. They're playing fast and loose. And the judge isn't stupid here. She smells the bullshit and then she's sussing it out for what it is. But still, this is a part of the legal process that is happening. So the reason why there's another day of a hearing today is the judges continue to take testimony about this because these environmental groups are seeking a preliminary injunction. They want the cessation of continued construction and running of things at the concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz. There's also an argument that's being raised by the state of Florida. They're saying that the lawsuit shouldn't have been brought in the Southern District of Florida, that it actually should have been brought in the Middle District of Florida. So let's take a second here. The state of Florida is divvied up into the Northern District, the Middle, and the Southern for purposes of federal court. And this area called Alligator Alcatraz, it's dealing with an airstrip, right? And a portion of that area is in Miami-Dade County, and a portion of that airstrip is in Collier County. Miami-Dade County would be in the Southern District of Florida. Collier County would be in the Middle District of Florida. So the defendants in the environmental lawsuit are trying to play fast and loose when it comes to venue. They're saying, you can't sue us here in the Southern District of Florida. We need to be in the Middle District. Well, and that's, of course, what do we know? They're judge shopping too, right? They don't want to be in front of Judge Williams, who's already busted their balls in other ways about other things. And so that's part of the arguments that are being addressed in the hearing that's going on. There's also that second lawsuit that we're going to get into in a second here, but I want to make sure that we understand kind of the entirety of the legal issues from this environmental lawsuit. So there's also the pursuit in that environmental lawsuit of not only the cessation of that, but the requirement that the state of Florida and the federal government make sure that they've not only complied with all of the federal regs that they have to do, but that they're also complying with any necessary state things. And there's also a big question as to whether or not the invocation of all of these emergency powers makes sense. The fact that the governor claims that because there's a state of emergency due to, quote, illegal immigration, that he's allowed to invoke his emergency powers to be able to do the things that he's doing right now with this concentration camp. But the biggest question that's going on is, what is the relationship? Where's the legal agreement that exists between the state and the federal government to allow this to even take place in the first place? Now, after that environmental lawsuit was filed, we then got a second lawsuit that was done. And this was filed on July 16th. And this was a lawsuit brought by the ACLU and other plaintiffs. And this lawsuit was saying the following. There's a whole bunch of people that are being detained at that concentration camp, and they have zero opportunity to be able to meet with their lawyers. It is a black box at Alligator Alcatraz. Black box of information, black box of contact. And we don't know, as the lawyers, the immigration lawyers, where are we supposed to be filing motions for bond hearings? Where are we supposed to be filing petitions to be able to get in front of courts? Because every time these lawyers have tried to do this, they're told, nope, talk to the federal government. Nope, talk to the state. We have nothing to do with it. But it's intentional, right? I mean, it kind of makes you wonder. It's either a really egregious Keystone Cops moment where they truly are so dumb that they don't know who's doing what. It's like a who's on first moment, but in a really tragic way. or they are trying to pretend to be ignorant about it so that they can just punt responsibility back and forth until eventually this happens. You end up in court and you get another good judge who says, no, I need to see what is going on here. So that second lawsuit involving the ACLU was in front of another federal judge in the Southern District of Florida. His name is Rodolfo Ruiz. He keeps on asking the government's attorney who has legal authority over alligator Alcatraz. And at the last hearing, just a couple of weeks ago, this is what the answer was. Quote, I'm not prepared to say what our position is. We have an idea, but I need to confirm it. I want to take a small point of personal privilege here. I would be humiliated as a lawyer to go to court and I would tell a federal judge of all people that I don't have the answer. Now, it's one thing to say, I'm not familiar with this legal concept or whatever, but when a judge asks you a basic fundamental question about the existing legal relationship on who is running a concentration camp in the middle of the Everglades that is causing this much national, international attention, you mean to tell me as the lawyer for the government, you can't answer that question? I think the answer is you can answer that question. You're just choosing not to, which means you are just as complicit as the lawyer, as the client, as the person that you're representing, as the agency that you're representing. You are what I call an enabler. And the enablers as the lawyers are just as bad as the bad actors that they're representing. Just as bad. So, Judge Ruiz ordered by today, in his case, he wanted to make sure that he got a look at what is called the 287G agreements between Florida and the federal government. 287G agreements are the ones that are the cooperation and the assistance that is provided by the state and local and municipal organizations or jurisdictions, to the federal government to help them in their immigration efforts. And in Florida, and I'm going to do a really detailed Substack on this written, and then I'll do an accompanying video here on YouTube to walk through it. But essentially Florida, because it's being run by DeSantis, it obviously has an incredibly stringent and draconian view of the 287Gs. But these 287G agreements should be executed, and they should be the things that are driving that relationship between the state, local, and municipal jurisdictions, law enforcement, etc. agencies, and the federal government. And yet, mysteriously, we still don't see a 287G agreement concerning alligator Alcatraz. So, the judge, Ruiz, keeps on asking, who is running this facility? Quote, who is running the show? And there is no response that is clear that is being given by the state of Florida, even really from the federal government. So the next in-person court hearing for the ACLU lawsuit is coming up on August 18th. But I want to just underscore, you have the environmental lawsuit, and then this ACLU lawsuit deals with the fact that more than 100-something detainees have already been deported already from alligator Alcatraz. No contact with their lawyers, no bond hearings, no ability to file bond petitions. And so the lawsuit alleges a violation of the First Amendment rights and the due process rights of these detainees that are a part of this lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU. The ACLU is also seeking class certification, that class action, the certification of an entire class to be able to continue in its litigation against the federal government. I appreciate how y'all want to continue to know about this, because I read your comments, I hear from you, and I'm always concerned about whether there is something of value that I am providing to you in these videos that we're doing. And the reason why I take the time to be able to do this is I want you to understand that there are so many nuanced things going on in court that run the gamut from just who the judge is that gets the assigned case, to the lawyers that are representing the parties, to the issues, to the public pressure campaigns, to just kind of the procedural status of these cases. They seem to move so slowly, and I get it, and sometimes the wheels of justice grind slowly. But this is where a lot of the battles are being fought right now, and that's in court, which is why We can't have a defeatist or a fatalist attitude about us going to court and maybe, not having compliance or not having the right thing done. We need to continue to use the judicial system as an institution, as a place where the rule of law is supposed to exist. We have to continue to use our judicial system for its purpose. And I'm biased because I'm a lawyer. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm somebody who goes to court and I do these battles in court. But it's this opportunity to be able to force the Trump administration to have to own up to what is happening here. And I do think everything was so hastily done at this concentration camp that they really don't know they don't really know, but that's not a fucking excuse. Okay? It's not an excuse. The incompetence of the Trump administration and the incompetence and stupidity of Kristi Noem, footnote, if you haven't seen the South Park episode about her, you just run and go watch it. But the incompetence and the stupidity collectively of the Trump administration, Kristi Noem and others, is not an excuse to violate the due process rights of immigrants. And it's certainly not an excuse to be able to put those immigrants whose due process rights are being violated in inhumane conditions at a concentration camp in the middle of the Everglades. And it is certainly not an excuse to hide behind your incompetence and your stupidity to evade accountability in court, especially when federal judges are pressing you to answer the questions as to who in the hell is running the show at Alligator Alcatraz. So my hat off to not only the ACLU, but lawyers like Scott Hyacin in that environmental case for the Friends of the Everglades. These are people that are saying, not on my watch, we're not going to stand by idly and watch our United States Constitution get destroyed by people like Kristi Noem. So I'm going to report back to you guys once I know the details of what happens not only in the continued hearing for the environmental impact case, but also what happens today with some of the filings that are going to happen in the ACLU case about who is really having the authority to run and operate and to deal with the concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz that's in the Everglades.